Chapter 23. The Crystal Skull of Zealandia. Ximena's eyes widened. For a moment, she did not move. She only stared past the broken heaps of treasure, past the gold bars, ruby-studded idols, and gold silk paintings half collapsed across the floor. Something behind them had caught the light. Not gold, not silver, not emerald, but crystal. Indiana, she whispered. Indy turned sharply. What? Ximena did not answer. She moved fast, almost stumbling over the uneven floor as she brushed towards the pile. She dropped to her knees and began shoving objects aside with both hands. Gold bars scraped loudly across the stone. A jeweled bowl toppled over. A rolled painting slid away and struck the floor with a soft, dusty thud. Ximena, Indy called. Careful! Her breathing quickened as she cleared some more of the pile. Then she stopped completely. There, resting on a short marble crowned column behind the treasures, was a skull. But it was not human. Not exactly. It had the suggestion of a human cranium. The proportions were wrong. The skull was elongated, smooth, and unsettlingly balanced, as if it had been shaped by a mind that that understood human anatomy but had chosen not to obey it. There was no true human nose. The eye sockets were deep and hollow, but not empty looking. They seemed focused, aware. The facial structure had an almost alien symmetry to it. Neither Sorry, I just yawned. Sorry. Neither monstrous nor beautiful, but something far worse. Intentional. The entire skull appeared to be carved from transparent quartz crystal. Its surface caught the flashlight, and split the beam into pale shards of light across the chamber. Inside the hollow crystal shell, there seemed to be another layer, a dense, facaded, whatever that word is, inner structure shaped almost like a sculpted brain. The light moved through it strangely, bending, multiplying, and folding into itself. Ximena stared at it in petrified awe. Indy came running up behind her. What is it? What did you find? She swallowed, unable to look away. I don't believe it, she said quietly. We found it. Indy froze. Are you sure? Jimena nodded slowly. Pretty sure. He nodded. He stepped beside her. Then he saw it. For once, Indiana Jones had nothing clever to say. Sorry, hold on. I got lost. It was here somewhere. Oh yeah, I just found it. Skull sat there in impossible silence, shining faintly among the dead wealth of empires. After Sumatra, after the ship graveyard, after the catacombs, after Oxley's letter, after all the maps and riddles and blood-soaked legends, it was real. Indy exhaled. The crystal skull of Zealandia, he said. Jimena looked at him. It's actually real. Yeah, Indy said, still staring. It is. He stepped closer to the marble column. The air around the skull felt colder than the rest of the chamber. Not freezing, just wrong. Like the warmth had been quietly pulled away from the stone. Ximena reached out instinctively. Indy caught her wrist. Don't. She looked at him. Why? Because we don't know what it does. You're about to pick it up, aren't you? Indy gave her a dry look. That's different. How? I made worse decisions professionally. That does not make me feel better. It wasn't meant to. Indy Indy slowly reached for the skull. The moment his fingers closed around the skull, the chamber seemed to hum. Not loudly, not even physically. It was more like the feeling of sounds before sounds happened. Jimena's smile vanished. Did you feel that? Indy lifted the skull from the column. Yeah, he said quietly. The crystal was heavier than it looked. Cold, too. Cold enough that Indy tightened his grip almost immediately. Light pulse, too. Light pulse, too. Cold enough that Indy tightened his grip almost immediately. Light pulsed through the inner facaded layer, faint but visible, like something deep inside had shifted in its sleep. Jimena stepped back half a pace. Indiana, I know. That thing is not just an artifact. No, Indy said. It isn't. For a second, awe took him. Then Trading replaced it. He turned toward Jimena sharply. We have to go. She blinked. Already? Already, he said. The Soviets are probably close. Jimena glanced toward the dark entrance behind them. You think they're inside the catacombs? I think if we found this place, they could too. He wrapped the skull carefully around one arm and reached for his satchel with the other. I'm not joking, Jimena. We leave now. The longer we stay down here, the worse this gets. She nodded, grabbing her things. Right. Let's go. Indy took one step toward the exits. Then he stopped. A sound cut through the chamber behind them. Clean, metallic, a rifle bolt being pulled back. Then another. Don't move. Hands up. Put your hands where we can see them. Turn around slowly. Indy closed his eyes for half a second. Oh, hell, he muttered. Jimena froze beside him. Indiana? Yeah, Indy said. I heard. He turned slowly, keeping one hand visible while the other held the skull close against his side. At the entrance of the antechamber stood several armed Soviet soldiers, their rifles raised and locked on both of them. Their flashlights cut through the darkness in sharp white lines. Boots shifted against stone, uniforms rustled. Every weapon in the chamber seemed to be pointed at Indy's chest. After standing in front of them, my bad. And standing in front of them was Colonel Ekaterina Ivanov, calm, composed, smiling faintly, and he sighed. Oh, great. You again. Ivanov stepped forward, her boots clicking softly against the stone floor. Dr. Jones, Jimena whispered. Who is that? Indy did not take his eyes off Ivanov. Ekaterina Ivanov, KGB officer, Soviet Army colonel, champion fencer, military commander, professional headache. In Ivanov's smile sharpened. That is correct. Jimena stared at her. She's the one who took my mother? Ivanov looked at Jimena with cold interest. You must be Jimena Moctezuma. Jimena's jaw tightened. Where is she? Where is he? Where is Omni-Man? Where is he? Where is Omni-Man? Where is Omni-Man? Where is he? Okay, I'm sorry. That was stupid. That was a stupid joke. Sorry. Let's get back on topic. Ivanov ignored the question and looked back at Indy. I see you found the crystal skull before we did. Indy tightened his grip on it. Beginner's luck. I doubt that. Ivanov's eyes moved to the skull. For the first time, her expression changed. Not fear, not wonder. Recognition. Hunger. So, she said softly, it is real. Jimena stepped closer to Indy. Don't give it to her, Indy muttered. Wasn't planning on it. Ivanov raised one glove. gloved hand. The soldiers adjusted their weapons. I would suggest you reconsider any crazy ideas, she said. This chamber is quite enclosed. Even you cannot outrun bullets from 6 different rifles in such a small chamber. Indy glanced around. You'd be surprised. No, Ivanov said. I would not. She stepped another pace forward. Now, Dr. Jones. The map. Indy blinked innocently. What map? Ivanov's smile faded. The navigational map. Still not ringing any bells? The map. Made in the early 15th century by Admiral Zhong He, Ivanov said coldly. The map based on translated fragments of Plato's Timaeus. Wait, sorry. Based on translated fragments of Plato's Timaeus and Critias, Farsi translations, Tamil, and other Dravidian transmissions, Ming maritime records, Greco-Roman geographical influence. Indy's expression shifted before he could fully hide it. Ivanov noticed. She continued, enjoying herself now. Zhong also drew from existing Chinese mapping traditions, the Mao Kun map, older maritime routes, and I suspect information derived from Ptolemy's Geographia and later transmitted through Islamic and Mediterranean scholarship. And he stared at her. For a brief second, he felt genuinely unsettled. She knew too much. Not fragments, not guesses, too much. Jimena noticed his silence. Indiana! Indy recovered, forcing his face back into dry confidence. You've been doing your homework, eh? Ivanov tilted her head. I guess you could say that. However, we have been doing much more than that by now. Ivanov, Indy said, if you knew all of this, why didn't you find the skull yourself? Her expression hardened. Because the map and the skull are linked. One gives location, the other gives access. Jimena frowned. Access to what? Ivanov looked at her. Zealandia. The word echoed faintly through the chamber. Indy said flatly, you really don't know what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I am dealing with, Ivanov replied. A relic that can help locate a lost civilization beyond known history. A civilization powerful enough to inspire Plato's Atlantis. A civilization with knowledge neither the Americans nor the Soviets can afford to ignore. And you want to weaponize it. I want to understand it. Indy gave her a look. That's what people say right before they weaponize something. Ivanov's expression did not change. You and your young friends are going to help us find Zealandia, Jimena snapped. We're not helping you with anything. A soldier stepped forward. Rifle raised higher. Indy immediately held out one hand. Easy. Jimena glared at him. Indiana, not the time, he said quietly. Ivanov watched them both. You will help us, she said, because you have the skull. You know the history, and you know Plato better than any of my men. Indy smirked faintly. That's a low bar. Ivanov ignored him. And because, she continued, you want Harold Oxley and Nima Moctezuma alive? Jimena went rigid. Indy's face hardened. Where are they? Ivanov smiled. Before she could answer, she turned slightly toward the darkness behind her. Mikhail? Indy's expression dropped. Oh, don't tell me. Footsteps approached from behind the soldiers. Then George Mikhail stepped into the antechamber. He looked almost pleased with himself. Mac wore a light gray suit jacket over a leather vest, and a white collared shirt with no tie. Dark gray trousers tucked near over leather boots. A bowler hat sat at a slight angle on his head, absurdly clean for a man standing in ancient catacombs beneath Lhasa. He spread his arms. Hello, Indy? Indy stared at him with open disgust. Mac. Jimena looked between them. Who's this? George MacHale, Indy said. Mac for short. British archaeologist, former Marine, ex-MI6. Mac grinned. Indy finished. And a Lion Soviet double agent. Mac touched his head as if wounded. That hurts, mate. Good. Mac's eyes slid to the skull under Indy's arm. Well, would you look at that? The crystal skull of Zealandia. Prettier than I expected. Jimena snapped. How did you find us? Mac pointed casually at the skull. That thing's magnetic. Remarkably magnetic. It tugs at metal in ways it shouldn't. Even metals that ought not respond. Indy looked sharply at the treasure around them. Then why isn't every piece of gold in this room stuck to it? Max smiled. Because the monks knew what they were doing. Indy narrowed his eyes. Mac gestured around the antechamber. When the Ming convoy delivered the skull to Lhasa, the clergy sealed this chamber with prayers, rites, and protective invocation. Whatever power the skull has, it's muted in here, suppressed. Jimena looked at the skull uneasily. So after it leaves the catacombs, Mac's smile faded slightly. Once it leaves, he said, that's when things get interesting. Mac muttered, wonderful. Jimena suddenly turned back to Ivanov. Where's Oxley? Ivanov did not answer. Jimena stepped forward. Where is he? Where is he? Where is Omni-Man? Where is he? Rah! Where is Omni-Man? Where is Omni-Man? Where is he? Where is Omni-Man? Okay. I'll stop with that. I'll stop with the Invincible references. Jimena. Indy warned. No, she snapped. Where is Oxley? Where is my mother? A Soviet soldier raised his rifle again. Indy moved in front of her slightly. Calm down. I am calm, she said, though she clearly was not. I want an answer. Ivanov looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Mauritania. Jimena blinked. Africa? Yes. Why are they in Africa? Ivanov's voice remains cold and professional. At our temporary base camp. Jimena's eyes narrowed. What did you do to them? Nothing permanent. That is not reassuring. It was not meant to reassure you, Ivanov said. It was meant to inform you. Indy's jaw tightened. If you hurt them... Ivanov cut him off. Dr. Jones, let's not waste time with threats. Neither of us can act on the moment. She stepped closer. I can guarantee that Mr. Oxley and Dr. Moctezuma will remain alive, provided you cooperate. Jimena's voice shook with anger. And if we don't? Ivanov's silence answered before her words did. Then she said, I advise you not to test that. Indy looked at Jimena. Her face was furious, but beneath it, scared. He looked back at Ivanov. What do you want? Ivanov's eyes moved again to the skull. The map. The skull. And you. Me? You know how to interpret what the map cannot explain. Indy gave a dry laugh. I'm flattered. You should be useful. That's less flattering. Ivanov raised her hand again. Two soldiers moved forward. Take them, she ordered. Carefully. Do not damage the skull. The soldiers closed in. Indy held the skull tighter. You know, usually when people ask for my help, they don't point rifles at me. Mac chuckled. That's why they keep losing you. Indy glared at him. I'm going to remember that. I expect nothing less. Ivanov turned towards the exits. We leave the catacombs immediately, she ordered. From here, they will be taken by military train to Islamabad. Once in Pakistan, we transfer to aircraft and proceed to Mauritania. Jimena looked at Indy, voice low. Indiana. He did not look away from Ivanov. I know, he said quietly. The soldiers surrounded them. Behind Indy, the empty marble column stood where the skull had rested for centuries. The chamber felt colder now, as if something ancient had just been awakened. And as the Soviets forced them toward the tunnel, the crystal skull of Zealandia caught the flashlight one last time. Deep within its transparent face, the inner crystal structure seemed to shift, almost like it was thinking. Chapter 24 The Desert Camp near Ouadan, Mauritania, April 7th, 1957, late evening. The journey from Lhasa to Mauritania had been long, exhausting, and deliberately unpleasant. The Chinese Soviet funded military train had taken 7 days to carry them from Lhasa to Islamabad, Pakistan. From there, a Soviet military transport aircraft flew them westward in stages. Islamabad to Tehran, still under Pahlavi rule, then Tehran to Amman, Jordan, then Amman to Tunis, Tunisia, and finally from Tunis towards Ouadan, Mauritania. By the time the aircraft landed near the edge of the Saharan wilderness, more than 35 hours had passed in the air. The camp near Ouadan looked temporary, but not weak. Pyramidal and rectangular canvas tents stood in organized rows. Rock-lined paths cut through the dust between them. Temporary warehouses, makeshift cabins, and low bungalows sat behind layers of barricades. Communication towers rose over the camp like skeletal fingers. Dining tents, barracks, maintenance pools, armories, and Soviet stations filled the center of the compounds. Around the perimeter, Soviet vehicles sat in a gridlocked defensive pattern. Armored personnel carriers, utility trucks, cargo haulers, tanks, armored fighting vehicles, Hesco barriers and sandbag barricades surrounded the camp in rings, turning the desert outpost into a military fortress. Beyond it stretched the Sahara. The sun was sinking over the horizon, setting the sky in a brilliant orange, red, and pink. Those colors slowly faded upward into violets, then deep blue, then the first traces of black nights. There was not a single cloud above the desert. The land itself seemed endless and silent. As the sun disappeared, the heat went with it. The evening air thinned and cooled quickly. A dry breeze moved across the camp, pulling at tent flaps and carrying the faint smell of fuel, dust, canvas, and cold sand. Inside one of the larger military camps, Indiana Jones sat chained to a heavy wooden chair. His wrists were locked to the arms. His ankles were fastened to the legs. The chair itself had been modified with crude iron restraints bolted through the frame. Indy tested the chains once. They rattled. He sighed. Subtle, he muttered. A moment longer, the tent flapped open. Colonel Ekaterina Ivanov stepped inside. She looked perfectly composed, as if the desert's colds did not bother her at all. Her boots pressed softly into the rug laid over the sand floor. She studied Indy for a second, then smirked. Cold tonight, isn't it, Dr. Jones? Indy leaned back as much as the chains allowed. I've had warmer welcomes. Ivanov's smirk remained. I am sure. Behind her, Mac entered the tent. He wore nearly the same outfit he had worn in Tibet. Light gray suit jacket, leather vest, white collared shirt, dark trousers, and leather boots. The only thing missing was the hat. Mac looked at Indy and laughed. Well, well, he said. This brings back memories. Indy glared at him. Does it? Berlin, June 1943, Max said cheerfully. Only this time, you're on your own. Indy's eyes narrowed. I've got Jimena and Oxley. Mac gave a little shrug. Not exactly beside you, though. Indy pulled hard against the chains. The chair creaked but held. When I get out of this chair, Indy said, you're going to wish you were back in Berlin. Mac raised both hands lightly. Calm down, Indy. Relax. You and your companions are completely safe. That's funny, Indy said. I've noticed people only say that when someone is absolutely not safe. Ivanov walked around the chair slowly, inspecting him like an artifact. Max stepped closer. His face loosened some of its humor. Do you even understand what we're chasing? Indy said nothing. Mac continued anyway. Plato described Atlantis as an empire beyond imagination. Wealthy, advanced, powerful, 10 concentric rings of land and water, bridges, canals, harbors, shipyards, temples, public baths, a hippodrome, walls plated with bronze, tin, and orichalcum. His voice grew more and more eager now. The temple of Neith alone was said to be filled with gold, silver, ivory, and precious stones. Unimaginable wealth, unimaginable engineering. Indy stared at him coldly. Mac leaned in. And if Zealandia is the real place that inspired the story, then what we saw in that antechamber under Lhasa was nothing. Nothing, Indy. A storage closet compared to the real city. Indy's face hardened. Mac, he said, you have absolutely no idea what you and the Russians are dealing with. Mac's smile faded. Indy continued. His voice low and sharp. Hold on. Yeah, right. Sorry. Got a little lost, my bad. That skull isn't a treasure. It isn't a key to some lost kingdom you can loot and sell piece by piece. It's dangerous. Ivanov watched him carefully. Indy raised his voice. It drove Oxley half insane. It got inside his head. I'm gonna have to stop you right there. Mac cut in. Indy glared at him. Mac smiled again, but it was thinner now. And speaking of Oxley, he turned and walked out through the tent flap. From inside, Indy could still see him standing just outside in the fallen desert light. Mac waved over a Soviet soldier posted nearby. Private? Mac said. Bring Mr. Oxley to Dr. Jones. The soldier nodded. Mac added. And don't drag him. He's useful when he can still stand. The soldier saluted and disappeared from view. For a few seconds, Indy was left with Ivanov and the desert silence. Outside, the camp settled into the evening. The tent canvas snapped gently in the breeze. Somewhere, a truck engine coughed and died. Metal clanked in the distance. Men spoke it in low Russian voices. Beyond all of it, the desert winds moved softly over the sands. Indy looked at Ivanov. You think you can control it, he said. Ivanov answered calmly. I think control is a matter of discipline. No, Indy said. That's what people say before the thing they're trying to control eats them alive. Indy's eyes narrowed slightly. Before she could respond, footsteps approached outside. Mac's voice returned, casual and pleased. Yes, he said to someone outside the tent. That's him. A second later. Oh, sorry. He added, Thank you. You may rest for the evening. The Soviet soldier murmured something Indy could not quite hear. Mac replied, yes. Go on. Take care, kiddo. Then the tent flap opened again. Mac stepped back inside first. Chapter 25 Oxley. The tent flap shifted. A figure stepped inside. Indy swayed slightly in the chair. Chains rattled faintly. Harold Oxley stood there, or what remained of him. His hair had grown long and stringy, fallen unevenly around his shoulders in gray strands that looked like Oxley's hair had not seen a comb in years. His face was thinner, sharper, but his eyes were the worst of it. Wide, red-rimmed, restless. They moved too quickly, as if trying to follow something no one else could see. He wore what had once been a proper three-piece suit, now torn, faded, and half buried under a layered poncho of rough, woven fabric. Around his neck hung a strange collection of colored cords, tied together into a loose, uneven bundle that shifted when moved. Sandals slapped softly against the ground as he stepped forward. Oxley also had a gray and somewhat long, stiff, disheveled, and aged beard. For a moment, he didn't seem to notice anyone. Then he spoke. The president of Florida has been kidnapped, Oxley said calmly. Taken by Philadelphia man, possibly Philly man. The distinction matters according to the wind. Mac let out a short laugh. Still like this, is he? Ivanov remained silent, watching. Oxley continued, pacing slowly in a loose circle. No one eats in Florida when the president is missing. It is widely understood, a matter of etiquette. He paused, thinking, I haven't even eaten anything since 2 seconds ago. Indy exhaled slowly. Ox, he said. Oxley stopped. His head tilted slightly. Indy leaned forward as far as the chains allowed. Listen to me, he said, firm and calm. Your name is Harold Oxley. Oxley blinked. You're from Leeds. Indy continued. England, United Kingdom. Oxley's eyes flickered. We met at the University of Chicago. Indy said, You're a classical archaeologist. You study ancient and classical Mediterranean cultures, and particularly the Greco-Roman world, from the Aegean Bronze Age to the early medieval era. Oxley's pacing slowed. You haven't even been to Florida, Indy added. Not even once. A pause. Indy held his gaze. My name is Indiana Jones, he said, but you know me as Henry Jones Jr. For a moment, the tent went quiet. Even Mac stopped smiling. Oxley stared at Indy. Something shifted, small, but real. Henry? Oxley said, uncertain. Indy didn't move. Yeah. Oxley's eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to focus through fog. Chicago. Oxley murmured. Cold winters, bad coffee. Indy allowed the smallest nod. That's right. Oxley blinked again. Then he smiled. Not wildly, not frantically, just briefly. There you are, Oxley said. Indy let out a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm here. Mac clapped his hand slightly. Touchin', really? The moment snapped. Oxley's gaze drifted again, sliding past Indy, the tent past the tent walls, as if something else had caught his attention. The skull doesn't like being moved, Oxley said suddenly. Indy's expression hardened. What? Oxley tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. It remembers, he whispered. It always remembers. Ivanov stepped forward slightly. Mr. Oxley. Sorry. Oxley looked at her. For a brief second, his eyes sharpened again. Clear. Focus. Unsettlingly aware. You won't like where it takes you, he said calmly. Mac rolled his eyes. Oh, here we go again. Oxley ignored him. He looked back at Indy. You shouldn't have taken it out, he said. Indy's voice dropped. Ox, what does it do? Oxley smiled faintly. Then a moment passed. His gaze scattered again, drifting back into that distant, fractured awareness. The canals are wrong, he murmured. They're not where they're supposed to be. They move, Max sighed. And there he is again. Indy didn't look away from Oxley. Not this time. Not anymore. Yeah, Indy said quietly. He is. The tent had gone quiet. Too quiet. Ivanov stood near a small field table set up along the side of the tent. On it sat a compact array of Soviet equipment, metal casings, coiled wires, a narrow transmitter unit, and a headset with worn leather padding. It looked like a half scientific instrument, half interrogation device. Indy eyed it. That doesn't look friendly. Ivanov didn't respond immediately. She adjusted a dial with precise, controlled movements. Mac leaned against a support pole, watching. Think of it as curiosity, he said. Indy gave him a look. That word doesn't mean what you think it means. Ivanov finally spoke. You had direct contact with the skull. Indy didn't answer. That makes you useful, she continued. I don't feel useful. Indy muttered. Ivanov gestured toward the device. We are going to test something. Indy immediately pulled against the restraints. The chains rattled sharply. Yeah, I don't think so. Two Soviet soldiers stepped closer behind him. Mac raised his hand slightly. Easy, Indy. No one's cutting you open. That's supposed to help? Ivanov picked up a thin wire lead and turns toward him. We want to observe your reaction. To what? Ivanov nodded toward a crate beside the table. Max stepped over, lifted the lid, and carefully reached inside. When he brought his hands back out, the crystal skull of Zealandia rested in his grip. Indy's jaw tightened instantly. Put that back. Mac disregarded him, setting the skull gently onto a padded metal stand connected to the device. The moment it touched the surface, something changed. Subtle, but real. Near the tent felt tighter, thinner. Ivanov's step slipped the headset over her ears, then motioned to a soldier. Attach him. Indy snapped. Don't! Cold metal pressed against his temples. Two contact points. Another against the base of his neck. Indy clenched his jaw. You have no idea what you're messing with. Mac's tone lost its humor. Actually, we're starting to. Ivanov adjusted another dial. The device hummed. low, almost beneath hearing. Begin, she said. The hum deepened. Indy stiffened. At first, nothing happened. Then pressure, not physical, inside, behind his eyes, like something pushing inward from the wrong direction. Indy sucked in a breath. Turn it off. Ivanov didn't move. The hum sharpened. The skull caught the lantern light and fractured it. Not outward, inward. Indy's vision blurred. The tent dissolved. Sound dropped out. For a split second, there was nothing. Then water. Not calm, endless. Black and silver under a sky that wasn't even a sky. Shapes. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Massive, impossible. Then stone, rising. Circles, rings of land and water, bridges stretching outward, structures too large, too precise, too alive. The city wasn't ruined. It wasn't gone. It was waiting. Indy's breathing hitched. A voice not heard known, not words, meaning. Clear, unavoidable. Return. The pressure spiked. Indy gripped the arms of the chair. Turn it off. The voice again, stronger, closer. Return me. The voice shifted. Not the voice, the city shifted. Not physically, but as if it had noticed him. Indy's eyes snapped open, back in the tent, but not fully. The skull was glowing faintly now. Light bending through its inner structure, Ivanov leaned forward. What do you see? Indy's voice came out strange. You don't want to know. Tell me. Turn it off. The pressure surged again. Indy gasped. It wants to go back. The words tore out of him. Max straightened immediately. Ivanov. Ivanov didn't stop. Back where? Indy's head snapped back slightly, eyes unfocused. Zealandia! He forced out. It wants to be returned. The hum spiked. Too high, too sharp. Indy's entire body tensed violently against the restraints. Mac moved fast. That's enough! Ivanov didn't move. Mac stepped forward sharply. Shut it down, please. Ivanov snapped. Not yet. Mac grabbed the edge of the table. You'll kill him. Ivanov hesitated. The skull's light intensified, slightly, but enough. Indy's voice dropped to a whisper. It's not dormant. That made Ivanov pause. Mac lowered his voice. Ekaterina. A beat. Then Ivanov cut the switch. The hum died instantly. The tent rushed back in. Sounds, air, reality. Indy slumped forward slightly, breathing hard, sweat forming at his temples. The skull dimmed, returned to stillness. For a moment, no one spoke. Mac exhaled. That was too close. Ivanov removed the headset slowly, her expression unreadable. What did you see? She asked again. Indy lifted his head, eyes sharp now, despite the strain. I saw the reason you should leave it alone. Ivanov studied him. Behind him, unnoticed at first, Oxley had gone completely still, not pacing, not muttering, locked in place. His eyes fixed on the skull, clear, focused, for the first time. Return it, Oxley said quietly. Everyone turned. Oxley didn't look at them. Only the skull. It doesn't belong here, he added. Mac frowned. Well, that's new. Oxley finally blinked. The clarity flickered, then faded. His gaze drifted again. The canals are wrong, he murmured faintly. And just like that, He was gone. Mac looked back at Ivanov. You see the problem now? Ivanov said nothing. Her eyes moved to the skull, then back to Indy, then to Oxley. And for the first time, there was the slightest hint that she wasn't entirely in control anymore. Chapter 26 K Rations. The tent smelled like metal, dust, and processed meat. It wasn't avamped, just empty. Jimena sat cross-legged on the rough canvas mat, staring down at the small pile of K rations in front of her. Tin cans, wax paper, hard biscuits, and brown packaging that looked as if it had been designed to survive a war and outlive the people eating it. Indy sat across from her, already already halfway through the opening. Already halfway through opening one of the cans with a dull military opener. Have you ever had these before? He asked. Jimena picked up a biscuit and turned it over. This looks like it could stop a bullet. It probably could, Indy said. Doesn't mean it tastes good. She broke a piece off. It snapped clean. Too clean. Jimena hesitated, then popped it into her mouth. She chewed, stopped, and she looked at Indy. You eat this willingly? You eat this willingness? You eat this willingly? Indy shrugged. Depends on the alternative. She swallowed with effort. That's aggressively dry. Yeah, that's not food. That's a building material. Indy slightly smirked. Wait till you try the meat. She looked down at the open can in front of him. Gray, compact, untrustworthy. No. Fair. He scooped a piece anyway and took a bites like it was normal. Jimena shook her head, then reached for a small packet labeled fruited. She opened it. Inside was a dense, sticky block of something that vaguely resembled jam. This might be better. Lower your expectations, Indy said. She took a cheap bite. Paused. Okay, that's actually not terrible. See? Indy said. Bounce. Barely. Across from them, Oxley sat quietly. He hadn't touched his food yet. The poncho draped over his shoulder shifted slightly as he leaned forward, studying the contents of his ration like it was a puzzle. Jimena watched him carefully. Oxley? She asked. No response. He picked up a biscuit, turned it slowly in his hands. Compressed grain, he murmured. Efficient, portable. Roman legions would have approved. Jimena blinked, and he glanced up slightly. Yeah? Indy said. Oxley nodded faintly. Still studying the biscuit. Hardtack equivalents, military provisioning. Durable, predictable. Unpleasant. He set it down. Jimena leaned forward a little. You know about that? Oxley finally looked at her. His eyes were still wild at the edges, but focused, clearer. Yes, he said simply. Jimena glanced at Indy, then back to Oxley. You're a classical, right? Archaeologist? Sorry, hold on. You're a classical, right? Archaeologist? Oxley tilted his head slightly. Yes. You primarily study the Greco-Roman world. Yes. From what time period? Oxley answered without hesitation. Aegean Bronze Age to the early medieval transition, approximately 3200 BCE to 800s CE. Depends on the regional interpretation. Ximena's eyes widened slightly, and he smirked under his breath. All right, she said, leaning in a bit more. Then tell me this. She pointed at the ground like she was drawing an invisible diagram. Linear A and linear B. Oxley's expression shifted. Not cockless, engaged. Linear A, he said, undeciphered, associated with the Minoan civilization, likely used for administrative and religious purposes. Still not fully understood. His voice steadied as he spoke. Linear B, fully deciphered, early form of Greek, used by the Mycenaeans, primarily economic records, inventory lists, palace bureaucracy. Ximena blinked again. Okay, she said. That was fast. Oxley nodded once. Ximena continued, testing him now. Difference between Minoans and Mycenaeans. Oxley didn't even pause. Minoans, maritime, trade-based, centralized around Crete. Cultural emphasis on art, fluidity, less militarized imagery. He shifted. Mycenaeans, mainland Greece, fortified cities, warrior culture, hierarchical structure, more direct precursors to later Greek civilization. Indy slightly leaned back, watching. Indy sat back a bit, pressed. Okay, she said quietly. Oxley picked up the biscuit again. He looked at it, then added almost casually. Linear A may represent a language unrelated to Indo-European structures, possibly isolated, which complicates translation efforts. Ximena just stared at him. Indiana, she said slowly. Yeah? He knows his stuff. Indy nodded. Yeah, that's Ox. Oxley took a small bite of the biscuit, chewed, made a face. Still veiled, he muttered. Ximena let out a small laugh. Indy shook his head for the moment. Just a moment. It almost felt normal. Then Oxley's drifted gaze slightly. His hand paused mid-motion. The rings. He whispered. Ximena's smile faded. Indy's eyes sharpened. Oxley blinked. The clarity flickered, not aligned. He murmured. Then he went quiet again. Ximena looked at Indy. He's still in there. Indy nodded once. Yeah, he said quietly. He is. Oh god, sorry. Just give me a moment, guys. Alright. Ximena let out a small laugh. Indy shook his head. For the moment, just a moment, it almost felt normal. Then Oxley's drifted gaze slightly. Then Oxley's drifted gaze slightly. His hand paused mid-motion. The rings, he whispered. Ximena's smile faded. Indy's eyes sharpened. Oxley blinked. The clarity flickered. Not a light, he murmured. Then he went quiet again. Ximena looked at Indy. He's still in there. Indy nodded once. Yeah, he said quietly. He is. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Ximena spoke again. She had finished most of the ration biscuits by now, though she looked personally offended by it. Indy was picking up the cans of meat with the expression of a man who had eaten worse and hated remembering it. Oxley sat between them, turning one of the empty ration tins slowly in his hands. Jimena looked from Oxley to Indy. All right, she said. He knows Linear B. He knows the Minoans, Mycenaeans, and the whole Greco-Roman timeline. Indy nodded. Yeah. She pointed slightly towards Oxley. Don't I have another question? Oxley looked up. His wild red-rimmed eyes settled on her. But there was enough focus there to make her continue. Shimena asked, but what about Neef? Oxley's fingers stopped moving against the ration tin. Indy glanced at her. That's a good one. She connects to Atlantis, right? Jimena asked. You mentioned Egypt before. Indy set the little tin fork down. Yeah, in Plato's version, the Atlantis story doesn't start in Greece. It comes from Egypt. Oxley whispered, Sais. However the fuck you say that. I actually don't know. Jimena turns to him. What? Oxley's voice was quiet, but clearer than before. Sais, however in God's name you want to say that. Western Delta, the city of Neef. Indy watched him carefully. That's right. Ximena leaned forward a little. So explain it to me. Indy shifted on the mat. According to Plato, Solon went to Egypt and spoke with priests at Sais. Those priests told him about Atlantis. Later, the story passed down through Cretias, and eventually ends up in Plato's Timaeus and Cretias. Jimena nodded slowly. And the temple was dedicated to Neith? Exactly, Indy said. Neith was one of the oldest Egyptian goddesses. Very old, pre-dynastic roots. Her cult center was in Sais, in the western Nile Delta. Oxley murmured, older than the kings. Indy glanced at him again. Possibly. Ximena looked intrigued now. What was she goddess of? A lot, Indy replied. War, hunting, weaving, creation, funerary protection, motherhood too. Depends on the tradition. Ximena blinked. That's a lot of gods. Ancient gods usually didn't stay in one lane. Oxley gave a tiny laugh at that. It was dry, brief, almost normal. Then he said, bow and arrows, shield, red crown, loom. Ximena looked at him. Those are her symbols? Oxley nodded faintly. War and weaving, death and birth, beginning and ending. She knots the world together. Indy's expression softened slightly. There he is. Oxley stared down at the ration tin again. Not all the way. Ximena paused. Then she turned back to Indy. You said, Greek writers identified her with Athena, the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicraft, and a member of the 12 Olympians. They did? Indy said, Plato mentions that association. Neith in Egyptian, Athena in Greek. Ximena tilted her head. Why Athena? Because they overlap. Indy replied, both tied to war, strategy, wisdom, crafts, weaving, civic protection. The Greeks saw Neith and understood her through Athena. Ximena thought about it. So when Solon went to Sais, he wasn't just talking to random priests. No, Indy said. He was hearing a story from the priests of a goddess that Greeks connected with Athena. Oxley whispered, the city of the goddess, the memory house. Ximena looked at him. Memory house? Oxley's eyes flickered. Records, stone, water, fire. The old man told the young man Greece was a child. Indy nodded slowly. That's actually close to Plato. The Egyptian priests tell Solon that Greeks are young in memory compared to Egypt. Jimena sat back. So Neef is basically standing at the doorway of the whole Atlantis tradition. That's one way to put it. Indy said, the story enters Greek fought through her temple. Jimena's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. But you said Neef might be Libyan. Indy paused. Possibly. Why? He picked up a ration biscuit, broke off a piece, and spoke while turning it between his fingers. Her earliest strong associations are in the western Nile Delta. The region sits close to Libya and the western desert. Her warrior traits, bows, arrows, shields, also resemble what Egyptians associated with western desert peoples, and ancient Libyan groups. Jimena nodded slowly. So, geography and symbolism, right? Right, Indy said. And later, people have drawn connections between Neith and North African goddesses, like Tanit. Tanit? Carthaginian, North African, associated with protection, fertility, and war. Not identical, but there's enough overlap that some scholars talk about shared regional roots or later identification. Oxley suddenly lifted one finger. Not one goddess, he said. Jimena looked at him. What do you mean? Oxley's gaze remained fixed on nothing. A road of names. Neith, Athena, Tanit. All masks worn by old questions. Indy and Jimena both went quiet. Then Indy said gently, Ox. Oxley blinked once. His expression steadied. For a moment, he was there. Niche may have begun west of Egypt, Oxley said softly, or at least in the western delta, where Egypt and Libya touched. A frontier goddess before she became a state goddess. Ximena's mouth parted slightly. You sound completely normal when you talk about this. Oxley looked at her. I am completely normal, he said. A beat. Then he added, except for the parts that aren't. Ximena laughed, despite herself, and he smiled faintly. That's definitely him. Okay, guys, I can't believe I'm saying this right now, but I'm actually going to drink a glass of water before I continue. I don't know why I keep doing this while recording, but I'm gonna get a quick glass of water and I'll be up in a jiffy. The video is almost finished. I promise. Oxley looked down at the ration biscuit in his hand. It is not normal. No, Jimena said. That part is true. He carefully set it down like it had offended him. Jimena turned back to Indy. So if Neef is tied to Atlantis through Sais, she might have older Libyan or Western roots. Indy finished the thoughts. Then the Atlantis story may have been passed through more than one cultural layer before Plato even ever wrote it. Egyptian, Jimena said. Greek, Indy added. Possibly Libyan or North African underneath. She continued, maybe. Indy said. Oxley whispered. Older than the names. The words made the tent feel colder. Jimena looked at him. You keep saying that. Oxley's fingers twitched against the edge of the ration tin. Because it keeps being true, he murmured. Indy's face darkened slightly. For moments, none of them touched the food. Outside, the desert winds brushed over the canvas walls. Somewhere in the camp, a generator coughed and hummed. A Soviet voice barked an order in the distance, then faded. Jimena spoke more quietly now. So Neith, Athena, Atlantis, Zealandia, it's all connected? Andy exhaled. Not cleanly, he said. History almost never connects cleanly. But yes, there's a thread. Oxley's eyes lifted. Clear again. There is always a thread, he said. Jimena looked at him. And where does this one lead? Oxley stared past both of them, toward the dark shape of the desert beyond the tent. For several seconds, he didn't answer. Then he whispered, to the city that remembers being drowned. Indy stopped chewing. Jimena went still. Oxley's eyes drifted. Then he reached for the fruit block, then took one small bite and grimaced. Vile, he muttered. Indy stared at him. Then, despite himself, he laughed once under his breath. Jimena shook her head slowly. Ancient Mediterranean scholar, she said, looking at Oxley. Mad oracle, food critic. Oxley nodded faintly. All respectable professions, he said. Alright, yeah, this is going to be the last chapter for the day. For this video, that is. Sorry, before we continue, yeah. The next chapter isn't really ready yet. I don't think I've even written anything. I'm pretty sure I have yet to written anything for the next chapter, so, this is the last one for now. Chapter 27, Jong-ho and the Chi-Lin. Jimena leaned back slightly before speaking. So, Indy, I mentioned this earlier when we were still back in Bedford, she said. But now I think it's finally time we actually talk about the Chi-Lin. Indiana Jones folded his arms while Oxley adjusted his glasses with sudden interest. The Chi-Lin, Jimena continued, is a legendary hoofed chimerical creature from Chinese mythology. Traditionally, it is said to appear only during the rise or death of a great sage, which what the Chinese call a Xian, or during the reign of an enlightened and virtuous ruler. She paused briefly before continuing. It belongs to a broader family of mythical beings known collectively as the Lin. Some depictions portray it with a single horn, giving it an almost unicorn-like appearance. Variations of the creature also spread throughout the Sinosphere, influencing the mythologies of places like Japan and Korea. So, how old is the tradition itself? Extremely old, Jimena replied. The earliest known mention of the qilin appears in the Xinjing, or Classic of Poetry, one of the oldest surviving Chinese literary collections. Portions of it date from roughly the 11th century BCE to the 7th century BCE. Oxley's eyes widened slightly. So we're talking about a creature recorded nearly 3,000 years ago. Correct, she continued calmly. Later references appear in the Spring and Autumn's Annals. References appear in the Spring and Autumn Annals. According to the Chronicle, a Lin was captured during the 4th year of Duke Ai of Lu's reign, around 481 BCE. Another important source is the Zuo Zhuan, or Chronicle of Zhuo, which dates to roughly the 5th century BCE. In that text, Confucius himself is said to have identified the creature as a Lin. Oxley rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So the Xinjing gives the oldest mention, he said slowly, but the Zhuo Zhuan becomes important because it connects the beast directly to Confucius and the intellectual traditions of ancient China. Exactly, Ximena answered, and by that point, the qilin had become firmly associated with the era between roughly 722 BCE and 481 BCE. Indy nodded quietly, and eventually, Ximena said, the image of the qilin became connected with something very real. Indy raised an eyebrow. That giraffe. Oxley blinked. The giraffe? Yes, Ximena replied. During the Ming Dynasty, particularly during the voyages of Zhong He in the early 1400s, Chinese officials began associating giraffes with the mythical qilin. She walked slowly through the room while speaking. Zhong He's treasure fleets traveled throughout the Indian Ocean world to places like Malindi and Mombasa in present-day Kenya, as well as Mogadishu in Somalia. During those voyages, exotic tribute animals were brought back to China, including giraffes, Indy said. Exactly. 2 giraffes were transported back to Nanjing. They were likely either reticulated giraffes or Nubian giraffes. Court records from 1414, the 12th year of the young Li Emperor's reign, ascribed the arrival of 1 giraffe from Malindi. The emperor and many officials interpret it as the appearance of a qilin. Oxley laughed softly in disbelief. So an African giraffe became a Chinese unicorn. In political terms, Ximena said. Yes, she continued. Mogadishu later sent another giraffe, though it did not create nearly the same excitement as the first one from Malindi. By then, the symbolic impact had already been established. Ximena sat down before continuing her explanation. The association became so influential that even today, the same words is still used for both the mythical creature and the giraffe in certain East Asian languages. In Japanese, the word is kirin. In Korean, it's girin. Oxley slowly shook his head. That's remarkable, Ximena nodded. The qilin itself is usually depicted with dragon-like features. Many portrayals show antlers, flowing manes, scaled bodies, heavy eyelashes, and long beards. Depending on the artwork, the body might resemble a deer, horse, ox, or goat. They almost always possess cloven hooves and fire, Indy added. Ximena smiled faintly. Yes, many artistic depictions show parts of the body engulfed in stylized flames or surrounded by jewel-like brilliance. Unlike dragons, however, qilin are not limited to gold coloration. They can appear in many different colors. She turns toward Oxley again. In Japan, the Kirin gradually evolved into a more deer-like creature in artistic tradition. Some depictions even make it resemble a dragon deer hybrid with a backwards curving horn. And Korea, Oxley said, the Korean version, the Girin, was initially more deer-like as well. Jimena explains, but over time it became increasingly horse-like in appearance. In Korean mythology, the Girin was considered one of the four divine creatures, alongside a dragon, phoenix, and turtle. It became deeply embedded within royal and Buddhist artistic traditions. She paused, and in modern Korean, Girin simply means giraffe. Indy chuckled quietly. That's one hell of a linguistic legacy. It spread even further. Ximena continued. In Thailand, the creature became known as the Gilien. It was absorbed into the mythology surrounding the Himavanta forest, the legendary supernatural forest from Thai cosmology. Oxley listened carefully while she continued. The Gilien combined features from multiple animals and symbolized the fusion of elemental powers. Many Himavanta creatures were viewed as manifestations of the Devas, Buddha, Buddha, Buddhista, Bodhisattvas, or celestial beings. Their mixed anatomy symbolized spiritual and cosmic qualities. After a brief moment, Ximena continued. The Qilin also survives through cultural performance traditions. The Qilin dance has remained especially important among Hakka communities in southern China. Idi smiled, like the lion dance. Similar. Ximena replied, performers wear elaborated Qilin costumes covered in bright colors, fur-lined ridges, and a simple horn. The dance itself combines graceful movements inspired by cats and tigers. She gestured with her hands while describing it. The traditional performance usually tells a story. The Qilin emerges from its lair, wanders playfully, searches for vegetables to eat, spits out the vegetables, then spits out a jade book before finally returning home. Oxley laughed softly. A jade book? Yes, Jimena said. The symbolism usually represents wisdom, prosperity, and blessings. The performances are accompanied by drums, flutes, and cymbals. She continued. Today, the Chilean dance serves roles very similar to the lion and dragon dances. It is commonly performed during the Lunar New Year celebrations, weddings, festivals, and other major cultural events. Indy crossed his arms thoughtfully. And all of this, he says, connects back to Zhonghe. It does, Ximena replied. She leaned forward slightly. The arrival of giraffes and other African animals like zebras, lions, and ostriches created enormous fascination with Ming China. Contemporary artists accurately captured the giraffe's height, neck, and proportions, proving many had actually seen the living animal firsthand. Indy suddenly snapped his fingers. Wait, he said. I remember now. The giraffe wasn't just some exotic curiosity. The Qilin connection became political. Exactly. Jimena replied immediately. The Qilin was associated with virtue, prosperity, and the heaven's approval of a righteous ruler. By presenting giraffes from Bengal and East Africa as Qilin, Zhonghe effectively provided the young Li emperor with divine legitimacy. Oxley's expression darkened slightly, which mattered because young Li had seized the throne from his nephew. Yes, Ximena said quietly. He was widely viewed as a usurper. He continued carefully. The appearance of a Qilin supposedly signified that heaven favored the emperor. So, when Zhong He returned with giraffes interpreted as Qilin, it became powerful political propaganda. If a giraffe wasn't merely an animal, India murmured. It was a It was a celestial endorsement, Ximena said. The room fell silent for a moment. Court's Confucian scholar officials used the symbolism to silence critics, who argued that the treasure fleets were wasteful extravagances. The voyages projected Ming prestige across the known world, but eventually, Indy said, the cost became too much. Ximena nodded. After Young Li's death, later emperors considered the expeditions unsustainable. Maintaining the fleets while simultaneously defending China against the post-Yuan Mongols proved enormously expensive, so the focus shifted inward. Oxley said softly, "Yes." Ximena Ximena replied, "Domestic security eventually took priority over maritime exploration." Indy nodded. "I see."